With Big 12 Media Days right around the corner, is the conference in a good spot with its new look? And we're talking about one of the newer matchups in the Big 12, Utah versus Houston. All that and more on today's Locked On Utes and Locked On Cougs crossover.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes and Locked On Cougs your first listen every single day. We are available on all platforms, including YouTube and wherever you may get your podcast. If this is your first time listening to our show, make sure you like and subscribe. Love interacting with all of you in the YouTube comments as well as on social media, where you can follow both of our shows today. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. You can make every moment more as the playoffs wind down. The sport stops sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all the customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. You can visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. My name is JT Wistricll, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. Excited to be joined on a special crossover episode with Parker Ainsworth, the host of Locked On Cougs. And, you know, Parker, you guys got in the Big 12 a year before us. This will be Utah's first year in the Big 12. And there's always conference realignment noise going on. You know, the ACC's members, or multiple of them, are trying to sue the conference to get out. So there could be more shakeup here in the near future. So I think it's a good time to talk about the current state of the Big 12, because expansion is just something that's always at the forefront. And as it pertains to our current conference in the state it's in with the 16 teams, I feel like it's in a good spot. I like the members. I feel like geographically, you know, you get schools in Arizona, all the way over out in Arizona and Utah. You got some spread out in Florida too, like that. I know it's far, but I think it's good right now that you don't have to completely go coast to coast. Some of those crazy matchups that some of the Big Ten and other places will see, to me, that's just too far. I think you got a good mix of brands that should be good right away football-wise, like a Utah, with multiple other up-and-coming. Oklahoma State, of course, can be. It's lots of other Big 12, Kansas State, that are going to be good right now, and some up-and-coming brands. I feel like for both football and basketball, this is a conference that's in a really good spot. Of course, you'd love to be the Big 10 and the SEC, but the Big 12 feels like it's still in a nice position.
Yeah, I agree. And thanks for crossing over me today. I feel like as I look at the Big 12, as we continue to add schools like yourself and add like the Arizona schools, it's interesting that, you know, first of all, I'm happy the Big 12 is always in conversations of growing, not shrinking, right? Like we could be ACC, which is like, no, these lawsuits aren't going to kill they might kill the conference, right? The Pac-12, as you know very well, just fell apart. Big 12 is not having that conversation these days. I will say, if I had my druthers, I don't know that geographically I'd want to continue to add out east where the ACC is. Well, they have some brands that I'd like to have in the conference. I don't know that's like geographically where I want to go. I almost wish that there were more West Coast brands to keep going true coast to coast with it. And really hit every time zone. I know in football season, Arizona is a West Coast school as far as time zones go, but it's a little different throughout the rest of the conference. I will say, though, there's a couple brands I've thought of as, you know, Houston football and Houston sports go as far as I'd like to add. But you're brand new here. Right? Is there a brand, if the ACC falls apart, the Big 12 adds people, is there someone you're actually looking to add, or are you just glad to be here in the first place?
Definitely glad to be here because, look, Utah was a good addition for the Big 12, but it's also true that Utah was on one of the last lifeboats to get out of the Pac-12, and being left behind would have been really tough for Utah. So it's I feel like it really benefits both sides that Utah's here, and they've been one of the 10 top 10 to 15 college football program the last couple of years, you know, 1 or 2 of the final 3 Pac-12 championships, but also they get to have a home, which obviously some of those other schools like an Oregon State and a Washington State, unfortunately, don't have at this moment. So I think if you're talking about Utah, definitely happy to be here. For brands I'd love to add, I've said it before, I think Clemson. I mean, Clemson is a team that has the potential to win national championships. We've seen it because they've done it. I know Cade Klubnik hasn't worked out for them. he was a 5-star recruit still. So it shows they're still capable of bringing in some of those big names. I think Dabo Swinney is still a national championship coach. I wish he would embrace the transfer portal a little bit more. But I even talked about this on Drake's show last week on Locked On Big 12. I want Utah to be aggressive. I want the Big 12 to be aggressive in adding bigger brands that really benefit them. I don't know if adding Washington State and Oregon State, as much as my heart aches for them and being left out, is necessarily the right move for the conference, because I don't think it really elevates them. But the addition to a Clemson, some of those other bigger ACC schools, I think that could really be a benefit to them. Is there anyone else that you would like to see them add?
Well, so with Houston being a school that's got an established basketball program at this point, obviously, I think of like Carolina and honestly, like even if you could go get a Duke, those kind of people, right? As far as like a dual sport or multi-sport program, Clemson's strong. I look at like a Louisville as well. They've had big years in football, when the right people come through, and then obviously the basketball program's got some history. I have to say, as a Texan, I think there's value in SMU, and that you could. My listeners hate that I value SMU, by the way, but I think like having alternating games in the DFW Metroplex, you're either playing at TC or at SMU every year, would be great for recruiting to pull kids out of that area, right? Like I think that's a good sign, as a good thing as well. And so I see a lot of positives again from the brands in the ACC. As much as I wish I could get some West Coast schools to kind of diversify where we're going. I guess Cal and Stanford are technically in it, but I'm not sure I want them. You played them do you want them?
I right now, once the same thing, like, just get to the ACC and it implodes. I feel bad for them. I do not feel like they elevate the state of the conference. So I would say prioritize the bigger ones, like you said, North Carolina, Duke. Like if that's on the table, if we could have, this would be terrible for Utah basketball. But as a college basketball fan, if we could have Kansas, North Carolina, Duke, and Houston in the same conference, are you kidding me? That would be must-see TV every weekend in the spring, early spring, late winter.
Yeah, it'd be. I mean, February would be a bloodbath, and it would be. I mean, it would truly, probably, honestly, hurt teams' chances at winning the whole thing, because you'd be so gassed out by the end of it. As seen in the Big 12 just recently as last year, but I do think that those programs and like Carolina has had good football years, right? I'm not saying they've never had a good football season. Drake May, right, was just a top whatever pick. They've had good football players come through. It sounds like Florida State's SEC bound if that whole thing happened. I don't know if Florida would allow that. What do you think about Miami?
Oh, I'm in on Miami. I would love Miami. I think that I think Mario Cristobal is a good head coach. I know he's had his issues. I mean, what happened at Georgia Tech, inexcusable. But he built a conference champion at Oregon still. And I know a lot of people have done that at Oregon still, but it's still, he got that job for a reason. He had success there. And Miami football is in a better place than it was under Manny Diaz. I still think they're trending in the right direction. Anytime, to me, you can add a school with the potential to be a conference champion, and not just a conference champion, but make noise in the playoff when they're at their best. I think that's a great addition. And I think that's what Miami can do with football. And hey, Parker, I mean, we've talked about men's basketball a little bit now. They even made a Final Four run a few years ago.
They beat us to get there. I know it very well. No, I think that there's opportunity there. I know we have a lot to talk about in the crossover here, but the other big 12 news is this idea like they could be going into private equity and helping this and helping that. I don't know. Houston is in a weird spot in that they're like growing into this power school, right? They went from a group of 5 to a power 5. Well, y'all did that a while back, and I want to ask about that later. How would that influx of private equity cash impact a school like Utah? I mean, y'all have been in the power conferences for a little while now.
I think it's definitely a plus in recruiting, right? I mean, just NIL deals and everything we have going on there. I think that's where you would look at it and be like, this is the best place where you can allocate those resources to try and continue to add the best players in the country, because NIL isn't everything for recruits, but I think there are a lot of recruits that are like, hey, I will listen to your pitch but you have to meet a financial threshold in order for me to even take a meeting with you. I think that exists in this world of college football. And I think anytime you can allocate more financial resources like that, I think that would be a big thing for Utah and just every Big 12 school. So it's going to be fascinating and interesting to see how it kind of shakes out. But like we said, feels like the Big 12 is in a good spot, and excited to see how they continue to be aggressive under Commissioner Yormark. And because of how aggressive he was in adding schools like Houston one year, Utah the next, our two teams are going to play each other this fall. So we're going to get to know our brands a little bit and talk about that upcoming matchup. And then we'll close on some fun men's basketball stuff at the very end. But before we dive into the clash of the Utah and Houston brands, we are going to talk about our fantastic friends at FanDuel. FanDuel is here for you. And I don't know about you guys, but I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games and the sports aren't sporting like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel's hooking up all customers with boosts or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon, capital LNO, and you can start making the most of your summer. So many fun storylines going on throughout the major leagues right now. Yankees are obviously always going to be one of the teams that has the spotlight on them. Dodgers, of course, too. But if you're interested in getting into action on your team,
the Astros over 500 right now. The Astros over
there you go. Yeah. Hey, out here in Utah, we're just hoping we get an MLB team still. I know you might have heard about the news. There's a chance. There's a chance. We're trying to believe. So we'll see. But whatever your MLB team is, make sure you guys head over to FanDuel today. Once again, FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, Parker, let's start from Utah's perspective first. To Utah fans listening to this, I would love for you to give us a preview of the Houston Cougars football brand and what we can be expecting as we play you guys year in and year out before we dive specifically into 2024.
The brand's an interesting question, and that's why we said that. So, like, before the fall apart of the Southwest Conference, it was I would say, fairly strong brand. Heisman Trophy winner Andre Ware, Hall of Fame coach Bill Yeoman, right? Great history there. Southwest Conference falls apart. Houston is left out of the Big 12 initially. It is Conference USA at best for a while. And then it was this program where, like, you'd have Art Browse as your coach and Case Keenum as your quarterback, and Browse would get poached. You have Kevin Sumlin as your coach, and he'd get poached. Tom Herman poached. That's over and over and over again, right? And now, as Houston's moved into the Big 12, they had their first season last year was honestly a little disappointing, right? They went 4-8 under head coach Dana Holgorsen. Had some promise. Dana had been in the Big 12 with West Virginia before. That a transfer quarterback in Donovan Smith, who had been in the Big 12 before. He thought some things would go their way. It did not. They got rid of him, brought in Willie Fritz, and things have been going great with head coach Willie Fritz. Came over from Tulane, so if folks aren't familiar with the name, same Tulane that beat USC in a Cotton Bowl a couple years ago. Like he's had some success there. He's had a bunch of great, big commitments in recruiting and stuff like that. The big issue in terms of like this upcoming fall for Houston is a lot of those recruits are 2025 kids. A lot of talent went out the door with the change in administration. And so you've got you're creating a culture with Willie Fritz, and it's can you get the things in place by August, September? I'm a firm believer that he's the right hire because in 2-3 years, we're going to look at Houston as a real threat in this conference. This fall is going to be a little rough, right? And so when you say brand, I'm like, well, I think we're going to be all right, but this is not the best version of that. Meanwhile, you guys are going to step in and make a real run at this conference. We're going to talk about our individual matchup in a second, but I would point out that Houston is 4-0 all time against Utah. They haven't played since 1978, but they are 4-0 all time. So what does Utah bring to the table this fall since it's been so long?
Well, first, they bring the bulletin board material. Because they want to get that, that first win, Parker. So this is the Utah program that is in a very good spot. But the question will be, how long will Kyle Whittingham stay? Now, I want to say this. I think Utah is in a position where they will hire from within, and they will be able to keep the program, the brand. Like, this is a physical Utah team. They want to run the ball and play good defense. They've talked about getting more explosive, and this year feels like the year we should see the aerial offense take the next step. But the biggest thing you got to know about playing a Utah team is they're physical. I know that when you guys, a lot of fans hear Pac-12, they think finesse. There's a reason Utah won 2 of those last 3 conference championships. It's because they were the bullies oftentimes. They really were good up front, whether it's that offensive and defensive line. They got some big dudes up there, and they're physical. Last year they had a top 5 run defense, and only one player from that defense, who was their best pass rusher, isn't coming back. So they should still have that really good run defense this year. Like, they recruit the right type of players, and it's because of Kyle Whittingham. There's a standard, and when you come to Utah, you have to adjust to that standard. Utah's not going to be like, oh, well, you're a talented player, we'll cave to you. Utah doesn't cave. And because they hold their players to that high level of accountability and recruit the right guys, they've been really good. And talking about Utah for this fall, I expect them to be really good. They have 12 players who are on 1 or 2 of their conference championship teams, and 6 that won both of them. So you're talking about guys like Cam Rising, right, who is going into his 7th year of college football. I'm actually the same graduating class as Cam Rising. And I've been out of school for 2 years now. Like, that's how long Cam's been at this. But you get a very experienced quarterback, an elite tight end. You have some young and promising offensive linemen, but some that have returning starting ability too. And like I said, some wide receivers, Dorian Singer, a former 1,000-yard receiver, a defense that replaces some guys in the secondary. But this is a Utah defense that has always produced good defensive backs, so you're not as worried about that. So I expect Utah. I think Utah is deservedly the favorite in the Big 12. I will say that. And yes, that is coming from the guy who has a bunch of Utah things in the background as well. So you can take that as you may. But all I'm saying is that I agree with the experts who all have Utah pegged as the conference favors. So when I do expect them to match up against Houston, Parker, even though the game is on the road, it just feels like programs in 2 different spots. Utah will be favored, and I expect Utah to win that game.
Well, it frankly is kind of in a rough spot in the schedule for Houston. Houston plays at TCU, at Kansas, then hosts Utah, and then hosts Kansas State. That's a rough month, right? That's just a rough month as far as this conference goes. You did say something that intrigues me, though. You said something about, like, as long as you have Kyle Whittingham. I gotta be honest, he's been there for, feels like, my whole life. I didn't know that was something is that a real worry? They've stayed in power conferences, and I have other questions, but is that a real worry for a Utah fan?
Kyle has openly talked about how he's closer to the end than the beginning, which, like, that's like a no-duh statement, but he's talked about retirement a few times now. Like, it's on the table. Kyle Whittingham will not be the coach at Utah in 5 years. I feel very confident in saying that. I think if he hung it up next year, like, I can look at it from, this is an inside information. This is just looking at it from, he's talked about retirement. He helped Utah navigate the transition to the Big 12. And I mentioned that Utah has 12 starters who are part of one of those conference championship teams. Shows how old they are. They're going to lose a lot after this year. Now, they're a strong enough program where they should recoup and still be really good, but it's still a little bit of a transition and an unknown, especially at quarterback. Does he want to be a part of that? Maybe for one more year, but he also, I think he'd openly talked about, like, not coaching past 65, and he's getting very close to that if he's not there.
Yeah, when you say he's gone in 5 years, I'm like, in 5 years he'll be 69. We just hired a guy that's in his early 70s. So I'm already like, wait a second, what are you telling me? No, so I guess that I thought you meant like someone was going to come in and steal. I was like, he could have got. Oh no, he could have got a long time ago, right?
Yes,
it seems like it's happening.
He turned down Tennessee and all these other places over the years, and I think it's just a matter of, like you said, Parker, how long he's been doing it. I think it does wear on you running a program. It's something I couldn't imagine. I mean, hosting this podcast sometimes can wear on me. Even I couldn't imagine running a program and things of that nature. And I love the opportunity to be able to post this, but like anytime I think anyone can attest this, right? You do something for 20 years like that, like that's a long amount of time. So that's where he's 64, talked about not coaching past 65 at various points. So we'll, and people adjust those time frames all the time, but that's where it'll just be interesting to see. Does Utah, there are programs like a Tennessee, right? They lost their legendary coach, never quite recovered. Yeah, Josh Heupel had that good year 2 years ago, but can Utah do that? That's what'll be interesting to see. Or does the replacement of Kyle Whittingham allow a brand like Houston to fill a spot while Utah slips a little bit? That's what makes this new Big 12 fascinating, and the rivalries that take shape and form. Like, let's say this year Utah goes in Houston, and because you're in that rough stretch, you have injuries and all the things of that nature, that it doesn't end up going great this fall. But then next year, you guys remember that. And I can't remember if Utah and Houston play next year now off the top of my head. But because we get all these, this is the crazy thing about having this many teams in a conference. It's hard to keep track of who plays who and all the things like that. But teams will remember that. So I'm really excited to see how these new rivalries take shape.
Yeah, I think especially there's something interesting about like the old guard and the new guard of the conference as far as those rivalries go, right? Like, yeah, Kansas State and Iowa State have something that goes back a bajillion years. And while Houston and Utah don't have that, they do enter the conference at around the same time. And frankly, they're kind of both trying to play disruptor in a weird way in the conference. I think that they both actually have a similar entrance in the conference in that when y'all entered a power conference for the first time, it's been a while now. When y'all first went to the Pac-12, what was that transition? Was it a multi-year transition? Because I feel like Houston's kind of going in through this Big 12 newness in phases.
It took time. Utah took some lumps early. And even when they got through and started to make Pac-12 championship games, they couldn't get over the hump. They lost them. I mean, I think back to 2019, you had a one-loss Utah team. It was like win the Pac-12 championship and you're in the college football playoff. Just 4 teams, and Utah would have been in it. Oregon absolutely beat the snot out of Utah in that game. But then 2 years later, Utah really beat down on the Ducks in the Pac-12 championship game, and they finally broke through. But it took Utah time to craft that culture, to find their types of players. And when I say find their types of player, Devin Lloyd was a walk-on. Brant Keithy was like a 2-star recruit. Brant Keithy turned into one of the recent better tight ends in college football. Devin Lloyd was the first-round pick to the Jacksonville Jaguars. They got a transfer like Dalton Kincaid. So many of you are listening to that and might say, hey, he's on my fantasy team. He was at San Diego before Utah got him.
Not San Diego State. He was at San Diego.
San Diego. Like, you got to find those diamonds in the rough that take your program to the next level. Utah was beating USC and Oregon when they had the better recruits, but Utah found the right players that fit their system and guys who grew into better recruits than those 4 and 5 stars because of their work ethic and mentality. So it's a process. It doesn't happen overnight, which is frustrating, right? We all want to win. We all want to be the best. I mean, hey, your basketball team that's what it is, right? Like, your basketball team is the best, and football is not right now, but it's one of those things that comes with time, and patience is hard to preach. I mean, Utah's frustrated with their basketball program, as we're about to talk about in a second, but it is something that comes with time, Parker, and it's going to be interesting to see kind of the growth and transition of all of these football programs coming together, the new rivalries, as we said too. I'm excited and can't wait. But as we prepare for a new era of college football, we also get a new era of Big 12 basketball, because we did get the recent scheduling release that came out and told us, hey, how are these games going to look, all the pairings that are coming up, and Utah is going to be taking on Houston this year. The two teams actually did play last year in a game that was a little closer than would probably you'd think based on how both those teams ended the season. Utah is nowhere near the basketball program that Houston is right now. But for fans that are just about gearing up for Big 12 men's basketball, this for the first time in the Big 12 from a Utah perspective, what should we expect, Parker?
It is. So we went obviously from the American Athletic Conference to the Big 12 and honestly had some success. I don't mean to be, too brash about it or whatever.
It's just true.
They won the regular season. They won the regular season outright by 2 games. The truth though is, JT, is that it is a bloodbath. And by that, I mean, like, there is no off night. You play a ranked team twice a week, every week from like January 1st until after January 1st, your easiest game will be your first round opponent if it's a low seed, right? Like that's just the way that the thing works. And it was funny because Houston lost their first 2 road games in the conference. And I was like, oh my gosh, what are we getting ourselves into? And then things kind of evened out once you kind of got used to that week in, week out grind. But you'll play at Kansas State. Then you'll host Arizona. Like, you just see these kind of gigantic basketball brands from all over. I will say though, from a fan perspective, it's so much fun. It is so much fun. It is so, like, again, you're seeing, we just had the NBA draft last week. You see guys drafted up and down this conference. You see real pros. It's the real deal. It's awesome basketball.
Yeah, it's something that when Utah can get up to that level, I think we'll be really excited for. This is a year where I think Utah might take some lumps because I just don't think they are not going to be a ranked team. You mentioned every week you play a ranked team, probably not when you face off against Utah, unfortunately. So that will be something that will be interesting to see how Utah and all their new additions and players kind of mix and gel together. But it is something like when you're going against the best, you do get better. And I think that's something to be said for Utah, that they have the opportunity to, because they'll be playing some of the best teams in college basketball. It's going to force them to grow and get better and adapt. And it's appealing to play in the Big 12. So I think Utah's recruiting potentially could take the next step up in that regard too. But they, just like Utah football and Houston football right now, there's a gap. There's definitely a gap in the men's basketball programs too.
There's also something to be said though about like the environment in a college, because college basketball games, if Houston plays like Kansas on a Saturday and that's turn around and go to Salt Lake City on Monday, like the environment can cover up a lot of that. I know that I don't mean to lump Utah and BYU together because they're so close. I was in shock at how like the TV was shaking, the crowd was so loud in Provo, right? Like what is a home basketball game like in Salt Lake City? You have the dad. It's kind of a basketball feeling kind of place in some way. Is a Utah basketball game a big deal? Is it good right now? That's just the road team.
Well, unfortunately, it's not the biggest deal, and that's where it's disappointing that kind of waiting for the team to get back up to par, and hope they do better. There's times that Utah, they just don't always get the greatest crowds for their games, unfortunately, and they always show up at the BYU game, of course. But I mean, I think a lot of the fans want to see just the team continue to win and do more, and that's where you will get even more of a crowd. Sometimes the crowds are really good. Sometimes they're not, and you have to shut the top curtains inside the Huntsman, which is it's never ideal. So it's one of those hit or miss things. It kind of depends on how the team is doing. But I think with some of the brands that'll be coming to town, like a Kansas, like that's where I think, and Houston, as we said too, like those are ones that you get excited, you get up for. But yeah, because the opponents are better, I'm hoping the crowds are better. But it's been, I mean, you got to bring your A game, fans included. Like if you want to win in the Big 12, like you got to create a ruckus home environment. So that's where it'll be interesting to see how this first transition year goes for Utah in the Big 12. But it's going to be tough for football and men's basketball. It's going to be fascinating to see how everything goes on in this new conference. And Parker, I'm just excited to be a part of it. Just like I'm excited to do more of these episodes with you. I appreciate you taking the time and joining me, Parker. This was a lot of fun, man.
Yeah, it was good to talk all things Big 12, Houston, and Utah. I hope. How about this? I hope we have 2 competitive games in football and basketball next year. Can we do both competitive? Would make me very happy.
Absolutely. It's more fun when it's competitive. As much as blowouts can be fun in a way, like we get the best memorable games are the ones that like your heart is. You're just in general like you're living and dying on every possession. That's what I hope. If these games turn into that, I think that would be exciting from a fan perspective. Of course, we want our schools to be the best, dominate everything like that in a way, but close games are always more fun. So I hope those are the kind of games we get. And it's going to be fascinating. Can't wait for this fall to get underway. We appreciate all of you for tuning into our episode of Locked On Utes and Locked On Cougs. Make sure you guys follow us on both of our show platforms. We'll be back with more content here very soon. And thank you again for making us your first listen every single day.